The moon has been keeping a secret for 57 years. And 9 nights ago, 4 human beings flew directly through the middle of it in May of 1969. 3 men in a spacecraft called Apollo 10 passed behind the far side of the moon, cut off from Earth, no radio, no backup, for about an hour. They were at that moment the most isolated human beings who had ever lived, and somewhere in that silence, a sound started bleeding through their headsets, a rising, whistling, almost musical tone coming from a place where by the rules of physics they understood. Nothing should have been audible at all. They did not report it when they got home. They buried it for decades. And on the 6th of April of this year, the crew of Artemis 2 flew the exact same stretch of sky. This is what those Apollo astronauts heard, why they stayed quiet, and what the question becomes now that 4 more people have just come back from the same place. To understand why this matters, you have to understand how strange the far side of the moon actually is. Most people still call it the dark side, but that is wrong. It gets sunlight, just like the near side. What it does not get is us. It does not get our radio. It does not get our voices. The moon itself is a solid wall of rock between that hemisphere and every transmitter on Earth, a natural shield about 3,474 kilometers thick. The moment a spacecraft slides behind it, every frequency humans have ever broadcast simply dies. Television, military radar, cell networks, the background hum of a civilization that never stops talking, all of it gone. It is the quietest place any human being has ever traveled to. And quiet, as Apollo 10 learned, is not the same as empty. Apollo 10 was a dress rehearsal. 2 months before Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, NASA sent Thomas Stafford, John Young, and Eugene Cernan to do everything the landing mission would do, except the landing itself, fly to the moon, enter orbit, undock the lunar module, drop it down to within about 15 kilometers of the surface, then climb back up, redock, and come home. It was supposed to be the routine part of a historic sequence. It was not when the spacecraft passed behind the moon and lost contact with Houston. The onboard recorders kept running. Stafford and Cernan were inside the lunar module, which they had nicknamed Snoopy. Young was alone in the command module, Charlie Brown. And at some point during that radio blackout, a tone started coming through their headsets. Not a click, not a pop, not the ambient static that astronauts had been trained to ignore. A whistle oscillating, rising and falling. One of the men describes it on the tape as, "Yeah, it sounds like, outer space-type music." You can hear the disbelief in their voices. You can hear them ask each other if they are really hearing it. At one point, one of them says, "Shall we tell them about it?" The other hesitates. No one will believe us. They did not tell them about it. Not in the debrief, not in the official mission report. The transcripts were eventually declassified in 1973, and the audio went onto NASA's servers in 2012, but almost nobody noticed. It was only in 2016 when the Science Channel built a documentary episode around the recording that the story reached the public for the first time. When it finally got out, the astronauts were asked the obvious question: why the silence? Why hide something so strange for so long? The answer tells you everything about what being an astronaut in 1969 actually meant. They were afraid of being grounded. NASA had a standing policy that any astronaut who reported a hallucination, an unexplained perception, or any sign of psychological strain could be removed from flight status permanently. A decade of training could end in a single meeting with a flight surgeon. Just one mission earlier, Apollo 9 astronaut Rusty Schweickart had admitted to severe motion sickness in orbit, and he had paid for that honesty with his career in spaceflight. So when three men heard something they could not explain in a place where nothing should have been audible, they made a calculation. They kept it off the record. They flew the rest of the mission. They came home, and for most of their lives, they did not say a word. The first three human beings to ever hear that sound chose to carry it alone, rather than risk what telling the truth might cost them. Whatever they heard was strange enough that they believed it could end them. Here is a detail that complicates the story further. Apollo 10 was not the only crew that heard the whistle. 2 months later, Apollo 11 flew the same path. When Michael Collins was left alone in the command module, while Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin descended to the surface, he heard it too. He wrote about it in his memoir, Carrying the Fire. His description, almost word for word: a strange noise in my headset, an eerie woo-woo sound. The difference was that Collins had been briefed ahead of time. NASA technicians had already worked through the Apollo 10 recordings by the time Apollo 11 launched, and they had given Collins a warning and an explanation before he climbed aboard. Had I not been warned about it, Collins wrote, it would have scared the hell out of me. That single sentence is the quiet heart of the whole story. The most famous astronaut to fly solo around the far side of the moon heard exactly what Apollo 10 heard, and the only thing that kept him calm was being told in advance that a known hardware quirk would make it happen. Other Apollo crews on later missions reported similar tones. Apollo 8, however, did not, and Apollo 8 is the mission that turns this whole question into a real puzzle, instead of a ghost story, because it provides the one piece of evidence that actually tests the engineering explanation. Apollo 8 flew to lunar orbit in December of 1968, 5 months before Apollo 10. It was the first crewed mission to ever reach the moon. 3 men, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders, spent 20 hours circling the far side and the near side in the command and service module. They did not hear a whistle. They did not report any strange tones. They did not describe anything resembling outer space music, and the reason is sitting right there in the hardware manifest. Apollo 8 did not carry a lunar module. It was a command and service module alone with 1 VHF radio system, not 2. No second transmitter, no neighboring antenna to create a beat frequency with the tone that Apollo 10 heard, that Apollo 11 heard, that later missions heard, never appeared on the one lunar flight that had no second radio to produce it. That is the cleanest piece of evidence the interference theory has ever had. It is also the reason most engineers who have worked on Apollo communications hardware consider the mystery effectively solved. 2 transmitters on close frequencies inside a few hundred meters of each other, combined with the unusual reflection properties of flying a few kilometers above rough lunar terrain, equals an audio artifact that sounds like whistling, because that is what radio beat frequencies sound like to a human ear. Add the psychological weight of being on the far side of the moon, cut off from Earth in a brand new spacecraft, and the experience scales from a minor audio glitch to something that felt paranormal to the men living it. So, what was it? The official NASA explanation, once the story was forced into the open, was exactly this. The command module and the lunar module were flying close to each other, each running its own VHF radio system on similar frequencies. When 2 transmitters sit near one another and their signals drift into the same narrow band, they can create a kind of oscillating interference that sounds to a human ear like a whistle or a musical note. It is a clean theory. It is almost certainly correct. Now fast forward to the 1st of April, 2026. For the first time since December of 1972, 4 human beings leave low Earth orbit. The Artemis 2 mission launches from Kennedy Space Center with Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen on board an Orion capsule they had named Integrity. They are not landing. They are flying a free return trajectory around the moon, a 10-day loop-up around. Back a modern rehearsal for the surface missions that will follow. On the 6th of April, 5 days into the flight, they passed behind the moon. They lost contact with Houston, and for the next several minutes, they drifted through the same silence that had surrounded Apollo 10 in 1969, except they went further. At their closest approach, Integrity came within about 4,660 miles of the lunar surface. From there, they coasted outward, eventually reaching 252,756 miles from Earth. At peak distance, that broke Apollo 13's old record. It made Wiseman, Glover, Koch, and Hansen measurably the 4 humans who had ever been furthest from home. What they saw in that window, we already know. During their closest approach, the sun dipped behind the moon and produced a total solar eclipse that lasted nearly an hour. The far side, already dark, went darker, and for the first time in the history of human spaceflight, astronauts got to look at the unlit surface of the moon with their eyes adapted to near absolute darkness. That is when they started seeing the flashes small white to bluish white, a millisecond each, as Wiseman would later describe them, pinpricks of light, in Jeremy Hansen's words, scattered across the dark regolith below them, micrometeorites, slamming into the surface at tens of kilometers per second, vaporizing on impact, producing brief, brilliant pulses that no spacecraft camera was fast enough to catch. The crew counted at least 6 back in Houston. The science team screamed with delight. That is what the Artemis II crew has publicly said. What they have not said, at least not yet, is anything about sound. Nobody has mentioned a whistle. Nobody has described a tone. That silence can be read 2 ways. On Orion's modern digital radio systems, which run on completely different architecture than the Apollo-era VHF setup, simply never produced the kind of beat tone that generated the 1969 whistle. The interference theory predicts exactly this. Different hardware, no hardware artifact, no tone, case closed. And that is the most likely truth. The Artemis II crew heard nothing because the technology that caused the whistle no longer exists. But the other reading is more human. Maybe the crew heard something and has not decided yet what to say about it. The old policy that scared Stafford young and Cernan into silence has officially been retired. Astronauts today are told that anomalous observations are scientific data, not disqualifying events. But old fears die hard. It took the Apollo 10 crew more than 40 years to speak freely. The Artemis II crew has been back on Earth for only 6 days. So what is the real answer? The whistle was almost certainly VHF interference. The evidence from Apollo 8 is overwhelming. The absence of any report from Artemis II on modern hardware only confirms it. But the real story is not about the sound. It is about why 3 men in 1969 chose to hide it. They were not hiding a mystery of the moon. They were hiding their own fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of losing everything they had worked for. That is the part that matters. Exploration is not about having perfect equipment. It is about being human in places that have never been human before. The far side of the moon is not haunted, but it is the quietest place any human has ever been. And quiet has a way of surfacing things that noise hides, including our own uncertainty. The Artemis II crew brought back data, flashes, and silence. That silence is not a secret, it is confirmation. And that is the most honest ending this story can have.